there's many paths, and then you just end up taking one, and then you see what comes out of that path. And I think the idea is just to do your best in whatever path you're taking and embrace it. And yes, and that's it.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Okay, good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest to introduce herself. So, Rachel, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Maurice, for having me in this podcast. So my name is Rachel Bayani, and currently I work at the Bahá'í International Community as the principal representative here of the New York office, which is the representation to the United Nations.
Tell me, Rachel, where were you born and raised?
So I was born in Iran, in Tehran, and but I was raised in Luxembourg, in Europe. But then moved at the sort of, early on, at the age of 19, actually moved out of Luxembourg to pursue university studies.
Okay. And so, but your upbringing was in Luxembourg. Was that with you had other siblings around you? How was that?
Yes, I have a brother.
Okay. Older, younger?
Younger brother.
Okay. So you're working in at the UN level initially. I think you worked before you came to New York. You worked in Brussels. Is that correct?
I did. I was the representative to the European Union of the Bahá'í International Community. Well, to the European Union and other European institutions, such as the Council of Europe and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And I've done this since 2013. And recently, actually at the end of last year, moved to New York.
Okay. And I will have questions about that, about the work that you're doing now, what you hope to achieve. But tell me a bit about your life in Luxembourg. Since you grew up, were you already like, okay, I want to have an international career or working in this, or not? How was that at your school, high school? What type of youth did you have?
That's a good question. I think, yes, to be honest, even when I was a teenager, I did like the idea of the UN. I didn't know what that meant, to be liking the idea of the UN, but I thought it was very interesting. And even to work in that context, I felt was interesting. But then, of course, then as you study, as you sort of walk a certain path, then your ideas also change. And but then to me, it was interesting that when I ended up here, I actually remembered that thought that I had when I was a teenager. And yes, so
And where do you think that thought about UN came from? Is that because of your parents, of a person that you met at school, or how did that go?
yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, in some ways, it's part of the being sort of different backgrounds. I'm half Iranian. I'm a quarter German. I'm a quarter Luxembourgish. I was born in one place, grew up in another. That also sort of, this idea of the planet actually being your homeland rather than a particular place was very much part of my upbringing. And so there was a natural proximity to this idea of the United Nations also. But then I somehow probably must have liked this idea of, working at an international level, thinking about what policies mean at an international level. That must have somehow spoken to me in some ways. I also it's difficult for me sort of to put my finger on exactly what triggered that thought, but I just remembered having that thought when I ended up moving to New York.
Okay. And a little bit about, your upbringing then in Luxembourg. How did your family end up there? Um,
Well, my
not
mother
everybody is
is grew
familiar.
up.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, my mother partly grew up there.
Oh,
So
okay.
yes, and that's where my parents met, and
Yeah.
so that's where I ended up growing up then.
Okay. Got it. And you are representing the Baha'i. Can you tell a little bit, when you got acquainted there and how that went, and what it is about? Because not all the listeners might be familiar with that.
Yes, so I mean, I grew up essentially in a Baha'i family,
Mm-hmm.
um, but of course, for those that might not be acquainted with the Baha'i faith, um, even if you're raised with the values coming from that faith, the idea is that at the age of 15, you have reached a certain spiritual maturity that then allows you to, investigate the truth for yourself and see whether this is a faith that is the one you would like to adopt for the rest of your life. So um, basically, we are not, we are educated in a faith, but that doesn't necessarily, or with the values of a faith, but that doesn't mean that you automatically become of that faith, because we very much believe in this idea that faith actually requires very profound understanding, and that each one has a free will and has to determine why they've embraced a certain faith. And that is something that a soul can only do for itself, to gain that understanding. And so this is the idea. So even if I say I grew up in a Baha'i family, I then independently decided that this is a faith that makes sense to me and that answers all of my questions. But then maybe just to what this faith is about, in essence, really, the Baha'i faith tells us that humanity is just one single human family. And that might sound simple, but it actually has very, very profound implications for every area of life. It has implications for how we view each other as human beings. It has implications for, the global governance systems we put into place. But it also very much has implications for every policy area there is, whether we're thinking about, food systems, climate, or others. So that is what the Baha'i faith is about. And maybe on the theological level, the Baha'i faith also highlights this idea that really there is only one God, and that the religions of the world have been sent by that one God to carry forward an ever advancing civilization, and that they're in essence just a chapter of one and the same book. And that is the book of God, and the religion with a big R of God.
No, thank you for explaining that. Well, then I have the question because I think you said when you were 15 you had to choose. Is that correct? Were you ready
Y-
at
I'm
15?
sorry. Yes, where
Because
was I?
you
What?
are ready to choose then, because you said you at a certain moment you have to you might have been raised within it, but then ultimately you have to make your own choice. That makes total sense. But is then 15 not young to do so?
Yeah, I think the idea is that as of 15, you have that
Oh, as
possibility.
of 15. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
For me, it was crystal clear, and I didn't feel too young, and I um I felt like I had this spiritual clarity about that this is what I want to choose. And it also wasn't an uninformed choice. You're sort of you're given the possibility in an education that is based on Baha'i values. You're given the possibility to develop that capacity to start thinking for yourself, and to then make informed choices. So yes, I felt very, very ready and very clear about this. And also nobody sort of, nudged me about it either. This was my own personal decision.
Um, and that's so when you chose when you were around 15 years old, then that's maybe also the same age when you had to choose, or when you chose for a study that you did, right? What did you study, and why did you choose that?
That's an interesting question. Um, yes, because I think our educational systems are also still evolving, and hopefully in the future will really allow us to again make very informed choices also about the path of study that we want to undertake, and allow youth and even younger youth to be very much involved in the life of society in very practical ways, that then allow these youth to understand the kind of academic path they potentially also want to take, so that because of course we know that the theory of studies and the application of it are different things. And so when you haven't had the opportunity to apply certain things, then it also becomes hard to know what path to take. Um, and so what does it look like for people as of a sort of, relatively young age to start thinking about these choices and to start being, for example, of service to their communities so that they can understand, their own affinities and what speaks to them in a certain way. And so, and of course, there's some studies that will always remain somewhat a bit more abstract than others. And it's difficult to sort of understand and practice whether that is something that may speak to you. But I do feel that educational systems have to weave that in to the process of choice, maybe earlier than is happening right now, or if it's not happening at all, then it needs to be weaved in. And the other thing is, I think, I mean, and this is coming from a European context, that is that you're also sort of, pushed into a certain path at times very early on, and that sometimes we see things in silos. We see people as being scientific, or we see others as being more literary or like more interested in sort of the social sciences. But then and then that also projects a certain image for a person unto themselves, and they start thinking of themselves in a certain way, while maybe they aren't one nor the other, or are some of it at the same time. And and then we see how, you know, human beings are very complex, and they can be interested in one thing, but then also develop, you know, other parts of their abilities. So what I'm trying to say is, what does it look like to have people explore these different paths and think about them, and not to silo people into or box them into a certain category. And so, having said all of that, I wanted to study medicine till I think I was 18, and then I switched to law. Um, and, you know, sometimes I'm not sure to what extent that was an informed choice, but something triggered it, and I'm trying to understand. I'm not sure exactly what triggered that, but maybe that attraction to sort of the international policy space um, was a certain factor. And then I was also projecting my life as a medical doctor, and I wasn't sure that daily, even though I loved the sciences behind it, that daily life was necessarily one that, and even that is not true, because I think I would have, I think there's not just one path for human beings. There's many paths, and then you just end up taking one, and then you see what comes out of that path. And I think the idea is just to do your best in whatever path you're taking and embrace it. And yes, and that's it.
Ultimately, you chose law.
Exactly.
So if you think about it, if you think back about it, do you regret that you chose that? I mean, I understand that, you know, you might have different paths, but is it in your case, oh, I wish I would have pursued, you know, medicine instead of law, or yeah, or
No,
is it
not at
more
all.
like that's how life goes, so I'm fine with it?
No. Once I made that decision,
Mm-hmm.
I was very happy with it.
Yeah.
But I know I could have chosen other things and also been happy with it.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I was very happy with it, and it sort of brought me to places and professions that maybe, you know, medicine would have brought me into other places and professions, but this brought me to things that I thought were very, very interesting. And yes, so yes.
To go back, so you know, you're around 15 years old, you decide to, you know, pursue, you know, within the continue the Baha'i religions. You know, you start studying, um, choosing, you know, of or affirming a certain religion doesn't mean that, you know, that it will really drive your whole life, right? I mean, it depends on the people on how they practice that. How was that for you in terms of, you know, then you start studying law? Were you looking for a job where you could combine, you know, your faith as well as, um, you know, what you had studied, your profession, or it just happened, you know, you did not choose for it, but how did it go? I mean, I know it's a combination now, right, in the work that you do,
Mhm.
but
Yes, initially, I think, um, of course, I always had the sort of the concepts that are embedded in the Baha'i worldview. They always informed anything I did in my life. And that was very, very clear, and very a strong sort of factor of even the kind of professional life I would afterwards live. But initially, I was not necessarily trying to combine these, because also there isn't, you know, there isn't, Baha'is are all protagonists and actors in their own reality. So even if you're working, as an artist or as whatever else, you are asked to be of service to your surroundings. So Baha'is in their private time, one of their major occupation is to ensure that their own community, the reality in which they live, their own neighborhood, that they play a role in bringing people together, and that they play a role in prejudice being dismantled, or sort of even inequalities no longer being embedded in the structure of the society, and that role can look very different, but it requires that daily work, because we believe that the ultimate expression of faith is service to humanity, and which requires you to be out there and to work towards the betterment of society. So, of course, that was always something that I was doing. And then at the conceptual level, these ideas would then naturally inform professional choices. And aside from that, also some professions just sounded exciting to me. And so, and I found them intellectually interesting. So then I would go there. But it wasn't until 2013 that I was actually asked to serve or to work in this capacity at the level of the Bahá'í International Community. And this is not something you necessarily apply for, but so basically I ended up in this without having foreseen this in any kind of way.
But why do you think you were asked to do this?
I don't know. But, I happened to work at the Permanent Representation of Luxembourg to the EU at that time. So there was already a certain affinity with the European Union. And so, yes.
If you look back at that job, did you do that for 10 years? Is that correct?
Which one?
When you were working in Brussels, be the
I
representative over there?
Yes, with the Bahá'í International Community, yes.
Yeah.
That was roughly a
Okay.
bit more than 10 years, yeah.
Okay. So when you look back, two questions maybe about that, Rachel, is that if you're asked maybe to summarize what you had to do there, what would you say? And then second, if you look back at that period, what are you most proud of?
So in terms of the role actually of the Bahá'í International Community, and I don't know if you're aware, so the Bahá'í International Community has offices at the international level. So one is its UN office here in New York, but then we also have a UN office in Geneva. And the Bahá'í International Community also has representation to the European Union in Brussels, to the African Union in Addis, to ASEAN in Jakarta, and as well as in Cairo. So we have these regional offices, and the role is really to be learning together with others who are also operating at that level, whether it's the UN institutions here or its member states or civil society around it, is to learn about what do these ideas that are embedded in the Baha'i writings, for example, this idea of the oneness, what does it mean to give that idea expression? What does it look like in the daily conversations that the UN is having or that the European Union is having? So when the European Union, for instance, would discuss, I don't know, some of its agricultural policies, how does that idea of the oneness of humanity, you know, inform agricultural policies? And then it can become very detailed and technical and very exciting, because what does it look like for agricultural policies made in one part of the world to, for example, the European Union, to be equally concerned with the well-being and advancement of farmers or the agricultural sectors in other parts of the world? Because more and more we see also how interconnected our realities are, and how a decision made here profoundly impacts life completely somewhere else. And so, as I said in the beginning, even though this sounds like an abstract idea, when you embrace it, policies that you're writing based on that idea look dramatically different from those that would have been written if you don't believe that humanity is one, and if you think humanity is sort of a coming together of just separate parts or entities, which conceptually is a very different idea. And so I think that is what, in essence, one could say is the role of the Bahá'í International Community at whatever level. And I think what is beautiful to see is, how many are actually open to this idea, and how many are also seeing that unless and until we embrace this idea, it'll be difficult to advance as a collective unit towards, higher level of functioning. And the collective unit, I mean humanity.
And then when you think back about your period there in Brussels, what are you most proud of then?
I'm not particularly proud of anything, but I think what I thought were some of the beautiful things that happened is, I've just alluded to it in what I said just now, is this willingness and openness of really every sector of humanity to start thinking about these ideas. And really this learning process that we had with others. Because of course nobody holds, the solution to the next steps. These are things that humanity needs to learn together. We need to understand together what this means, because every individual, every part of the world has very profound insights about what our collective life can look like. And until and unless those insights aren't acknowledged or brought together in a collective conversation, it will be very, very difficult to advance. So I'm very grateful for those moments where, we felt that there was a beginning of a building of a unity of vision as to the next steps ahead, a unity of vision that was shared by either, I don't know, members of the European Parliament, members of the European Commission, or even member states and civil society.
Okay, so now you're in New York, right? Where I think the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are an important part of the work that you do. Is there maybe one of the goals that especially resonates with you, or are all 17 important?
No, everything is important, and you need all of it to sort of, for the whole thing to come together. But I think what is interesting is this, that we all think together about our assumption around development, and that actually development is not something that is brought from one part of the world to another, but that every population needs to figure out its own path of development. and every population has the capacity to do that. And so if development is not something that is brought from one part of the world to another, then what does that mean? If development is something that we all are working together and that really no country in the world has figured out, because yes, there are countries that, maybe one can call are materially more developed than others in terms of, infrastructure or whatever systems they've been putting into place. But then if you look at development as a much broader conception, if you have a much broader conception of development, development doesn't only mean advancement of material means, because we know that that doesn't lead to a functioning society. You need something else much deeper for society to function. So if, for example, the way people feel that they're connected to their communities, people don't feel a sense of isolation, if that becomes part of your understanding of a wholesome society, then we very much see that every place on this earth is walking on a path of development. And so, and that every place in this world needs to learn from another place. So I think for us, this is a very important reconceptualization of this idea of development. And now speaking about this, the new agenda. And so these are things that we want to very much highlight also in this conversation, so that we don't, basically split up the world into those that know how things are working and those that are recipients of that knowledge. But the world is, every place contains knowledge, and without that particular knowledge, no place can advance to its fullest.
No, well, you know that I work at the moment for the Joint Learning Initiative on Faith and Local Communities. So what you are explaining here, the importance of, mutual learning, joint learning is also very important for us, where we try to connect the academics, pre-academics with practitioners, and acknowledging that you all need, not only academic research, but also wisdom, traditional knowledge, all of that. So I appreciate that. Rachel, we are, despite all good intentions, we are not, it seems that we are not going to reach those sustainable development goals before 2030. And I don't know if you're aware, but a growing group of people have said, one of the reasons that we are not reaching those goals is that we did not pay proper attention to the abilities, skills, and knowledge that you need as an individual and as a community. And maybe some of that, you kind of explained as well, or the importance of it. So as a result of those discussions, they came up with 5 inner development goals that are required to ultimately work on the system and process changes that you need. And those 5 inner development goals are being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. And under that, there are 25 skills that are required, like empathy, critical thinking, forgiveness. So my question to you are maybe a couple relation to that. One is, have you heard about the inner development goals? If you have or you have not, what are your thoughts about that? Um, and yeah, which one, is there a particular quality that especially resonates with you?
I think this just the way, I mean, this sounds beautiful, and I think one of the qualities, again, and that relates to my prior sort of what I mentioned before, is this idea of humility. And that really none of us has figured anything out, and that we need each other to figure these things out. But also this idea that about how we see others, right? Because if you see others as endowed with capacity, and you take that capacity very seriously, even if, some of these capacities may not have found full expression, with none of us did they find full expression, but even that may be the case, you will see them in that light, and that changes your posture dramatically towards an individual, but also towards a region of the world. And then you walk on that collective path of learning together with them, where you don't transfer knowledge, but you together uncover new knowledge, and where you also know the limitations of your own reality. And so I think these two things are, for me, very essential qualities in the development work. So the humility on one hand, but then also seeing everyone with this eye of richness, and every part of the world with the eye of richness. And then maybe something to say at a more structural level, or in terms of the systems that humanity has in place. And I think we need to analyze those systems very, very deeply and understand where the systems have come from, and how were they designed in the first place, and what are the assumptions behind those systems. So when we're looking at our economic models, at the way we carry out trade, just to name one kind of type of system, what are the assumptions behind those? And unless and until we don't look at the systems, our development work is also going to be sort of just patching up, shortcomings, but they're not going to, in the long run, transform society. And I think these are some of the limitations of maybe what we have on the table right now, is that we need to think about, what does a global governance system look like that allows every part of the world to flourish? What does an economic model look like that allows every part of the world to flourish? And so these two conversations need to go hand in hand. We need to look at the system, but then, of course, we also need to look at, what does it mean at the grassroots for a population to take charge of its own development? That doesn't mean we don't draw on each other's insights or we don't think together, but it just places the onus of that work somewhere where maybe it hasn't been placed so much.
Okay. No, thanks, Rochelle. And maybe my translation is that there should be a balance between the SDGs and the IDGs that you need, you know. And you also said humility you consider to be very important, which is, as part of the inner development goals, a skill that falls under relating, um, of the 5 inner development goals. I would like to maybe piggyback a little bit further on that, and that is, if you look at relating, you're talking about connection is necessary. What I hope this podcast is contributing to is connecting people. And I connect you with, we are connected. I'm connecting you with the listeners. And connection is then ultimately also maybe the start of a possible dialogue that could take place. And maybe that's more important than ever in this polarized world. And to really go into that joint learning, you need to start and to feel connected, right? So I'm connecting you with the previous guest, and the previous guest has a question for you. And the question is,
Como invitado, ¿cuál ha sido su gran potencia y qué considera para decir, qué es lo que consideran para poder continuar que la humanidad, no solo la juventud, porque para la vida no hay edad en las prácticas. Entonces, ¿qué considera? ¿Cuál sería importante que continúen los que vienen después de él o de ella?
So what do you consider important for the younger or future generations to continue practicing to improve humanity?
And it's a very, very beautiful question. And I think the younger generations and whatever, for example, educational systems we have in place, what other systems there are that nurture younger generations, their primary objective must be to instill this understanding of the oneness of humanity in the younger generations. We need people who are able to see the world in a certain way and are able to tend to its needs, because they have that profound understanding of that we are ultimately just one human family. So what does it look like for every space there is, every possibility there is, and that the younger generations are in touch with, to really be, thinking about this idea? So what does it mean for an educational system to put that idea at its forefront? So whether you're thinking about math or science, even your science will look very different if you have the oneness of humanity as your sort of framework. And so I think that is one of the most precious things that we can do for the younger generations, and that they can help us to do.
um, you know, if you look at the younger generation within the Baha'i community, are they challenged with, well, let's put it this way, are they different than when you were young? So do you see changes within the youth of the Baha'i community and how they, live, approach, look at these issues?
It is difficult to sort of say in this ways, but I think we have put systems in place where youth, even children from early on, are taught to really see themselves as actors whose purpose is twofold. On one hand, work on their own moral improvement, and on the other hand, work towards the betterment of society. And both go hand in hand. You can't work on your own moral and spiritual qualities if you're not tending to the needs of others. And if you want to tend to the needs of others, you do need to have, started working on those qualities at an individual level. So these are two very closely interrelated goals. So Baha'i youth and children from an early age are sort of encouraged to really see themselves like that. But then also they are embedded in the life of society in in a very profound way, in the sense that, like 12-year-olds sit around and together analyze, what is the need of my neighborhood? Where do I see shortcomings? What is my role in it? Where do I see injustice? How do I think about injustice, even in its more subtle forms, whether it's in school, whether it's in my neighborhood? And how do I start working towards, addressing that, so that, these young people don't see themselves as simple, sort of passive bystanders of things that are happening, and that they have no ability to impact. So what I'm trying to say is that, how do you nurture agency in an individual at an early stage? Because I feel that some of the things the younger generations are struggling with is, that kind of sense of powerlessness. And powerlessness comes from this idea, on one hand, that maybe you don't have purpose, you don't see your purpose, but also if you feel there may be purpose, you don't feel you have agency. And so what does it mean to instill agency? And so I think that is something that the younger generations are really more and more understanding, maybe than I did at my time, simply because also, the realities are evolving. And so, so that is one thing. But of course, on the other hand, they're also exposed to things, and we all know what those are, things that maybe breed passivity at a scale that, even like 15 years ago looked different. And so, and we have to be very, very aware of those forces in society that rob you of that agency, and that are designed to entertain you and to actually make you passive, and to even rob that faculty of thinking from you. And so, we have to be aware that those forces are becoming stronger and stronger. And as these forces become stronger and stronger, the efforts that need to go into sort of ensuring that there is that understanding of agency, and that even younger generations can have profound impacts on their surroundings, needs to become stronger too.
I think I don't know the numbers around this, but I think that Baha'i is able to attract the younger generation in comparison with some of the other faiths out there. Is that indeed correct, I'm saying? And if so, why do you think that's the case?
I don't know about those exact numbers, but I also, we collaborate with everyone that is willing to work towards the betterment of society. So when we're saying, Baha'i youth that are engaged at the grassroots level and trying to think about, how do I eradicate prejudice from the neighborhood I live in? How do I become a connector between different populations and different youth, for example, coming from different backgrounds? They don't do that alone. They do that together with their peers, whether they're Baha'is or not. We believe that the advancement of society can only take place together with others. And so when we're working at the grassroots level, we don't distinguish between now, who's a Baha'i and who isn't working on these goals, but it is really about what becomes essential is the work itself and the process of thinking that is behind it, and that daily endeavor that the youth from every kind of background then put together into that work. So maybe just to sort of highlight that, and yes.
Okay, let us continue to connect then. Maybe your question for the next guest.
Oh my God, what? That's a difficult one. So maybe one question is, how does the next guest feel that this idea of us just being one single human family and that humanity is one, how do they feel that can take root in the hearts of mind of people?
Okay. Rain, I always say I'm happy that I'm not the one that has to answer these questions of my guests. But my guest has always been great in coming up with, answers. So looking forward to that. I told you in advance, I always have a question about music as well, because music is very important to me. So I would like to ask you, if I ask you to come up with a piece of music or a song that best embodies what you are about, Rachel is, which song or piece of music would that be and why?
That's a very hard question. I don't have anything specific that comes to mind, but maybe I can just say that, and this is, of course, this is personal taste, and this is also what might have grown up with, that I like sort of music that combines maybe Eastern tunes to Western tunes, whatever East and West. I mean, for the sort of, but because there's no other way to express this at this stage. So yes, that is pleasing to me, and there's many types of music that that do that. And again, that is, sometimes these things are just purely because our ears have been tuned to certain things, and then we find those appealing. So that's all I can give you in terms of the type of music.
I'm going to push you a bit. So if I ask you to come up with an example of such a song, what comes in mind immediately? If you
Complete
look back.
blackout. Like absolute, yes. But I think there's many, but I can't now. Yeah.
When I would ask you to stand up and dance, which song would come up there, brings you back to, your years at university, or, 2 weeks ago at the meeting at the UN?
Hardly any, Maurice. So I think you'll be coming to the limits of your pushing there. Yes.
Okay. Well, let us know if if it comes to you in the next couple of days, because we have a little bit of time before we will share this podcast with the world. Although, listeners, when you hear it now, of course, you should check the Spotify playlist. If you search in Spotify for #WalkTalkListen, you will find all the songs and pieces of music that have been selected by my guests. Yeah, let us go back a little bit to your work in New York. You're dealing with many different issues. What worries you most at the moment?
There's many worrying things happening. But I also feel that if you take a bit of a step back and you look at the worrying things, but that's also the other things that are happening and that are beautiful things, you can almost categorize, society into, or you see clearly that there are two processes in hand. One is a process of very, very rapid disintegration of the order we currently have, or of the reality we currently have. And where we see that whatever we had built up so far, we see very clearly as no longer being able to tend to the needs of a global interconnected society. And on the other hand, we're seeing, so many individuals and movements of, that have a beautiful vision and that are really trying to see what does the next stage of our collective life look like. And it's interesting that as that one process of disintegration of, one can call it the old, takes speed, this other process of thinking what needs to be built in its stead is also taking speed. So, and I think whenever we look at society, we have to keep those two processes in mind. And we have to understand what the interplay between both processes is, because otherwise also that process of disintegration, which is very loud right now, and it will become louder, can be disheartening. And so what does it look like to have that wholesome view and not just look at that one process? Because that's also not reality, right? That we don't just have this one thing happening. We have many other wonderful things happening at the same time. So maybe that is something that I can sort of, the way I see society right now.
No, that's beautiful. I mean, my next question is always after what worries you most? Where do you still see hope? And you answered both. So thank you for that. Rachel, you know that this podcast is a spin-off of a 100-mile walk that I started to do in 2012. I walked 100 mile in 5 days to raise awareness about hunger, poverty, and injustice. If you would be asked to walk 100 mile in 5 days, what would motivate you to walk that extra mile?
What would motivate me to walk? I think maybe the idea of being in touch with nature in a certain way, provided that it is through nature I would be walking. Because we know that, nature has, and just the visuals of nature have a profound impact on our well-being. And so to be able to take that in over 100 miles, and to let that be a source of inspiration and creativity for the work that I would be doing then, that would be something that would motivate me. But it would need to be connected to this other purpose, right? That it would allow for that it would have a concrete outcome in terms of helping me carry out what I feel I would need to carry out. So it wouldn't only be limited to the thinking about the walk itself. I think anything we do any sort of self-nourishment needs to have the purpose of translating itself into, advancing our society.
You have worked in many different communities and with many different people. And also you've navigated through different cultures as well. I mean, your whole upbringing, your own self is based on different cultures, backgrounds as well. What did those people and communities taught you or teach you that you could never have learned from a book?
Everything. Like, of course, there's many things one can learn from a book, but it's about our lived reality. And so I can only say that I have learned a lot from, first of all, from different cultures, the way they understand certain things, and knowing that every culture has its own beauty and own contribution to make to society, and actually an irreplaceable one. And I think that is some of the, very, very big things that I learned from being exposed to, different cultures, and knowing that actually fundamentally we all have almost the same aspirations. Everyone wants to live a meaningful life. Everyone wants to be, wants their children to live meaningful lives and fulfilling lives. Everyone wants their lives to be shaped by certain values. And those values are pretty much universal if you unpack them. And they might look differently in a different culture, or they might express themselves differently in a certain culture, but the essence of it is the same. And so then looking through that lens, you see that human beings are are the same everywhere, but that richness and the beauty and the colors of the different cultures are what makes humanity beautiful. So yeah, maybe that's just to sum up, that's one of the things that I think I learned most.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. Rachel, these conversations always go fast, but before I thank you for today's conversation, is there any question that I did not ask you today that I should have asked you?
No, I think you were very comprehensive. So thank you very much for this, Maurice.
Well, thank you, Rachel, for your willingness to talk with me and to share, your experiences, your stories with the audience, for who you are, what you do, and all the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me part of this and giving me the honor to speak on your podcast.
It's mutual.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.